I would like to first of all welcome all the participants to the roundtable. But before starting, let me maybe get through, let's say, a few thoughts that we had before organize and reasons why we organized this. Well, when we were thinking about how can we make the EUMEPLAT seminar meetings in Ghent as interesting as possible, we immediately thought about inviting people from the industry. We thought about not only that it could be useful, but it is really necessary because the topics we're working on are changing every day. So it's really very important to have people from the industry here. We also immediately thought about the innumerable associations and networks and stakeholders which are present in Brussels, so 50 kilometers from here. And especially we know that also in the field of the media and audiovisual industry, there is a large number of associations, networks, stakeholders being presented in the Belgian and European capital, with of course also in mind that the European Union has been playing a very important role in, let's say, as a policy maker in the field of media and especially visual media ever since the early 1990s. I know that the whole scandal which is now going around Vice President Kylie and other members of the European Parliament might well throw a shadow on those networks and associations which are turning around the European institutions. But what is often lost in the debate today about the scandal is that those associations are not only to be reduced to lobby machines in a negative sense. They are also necessary to inform those policymakers, to make them aware that European interests can be endangered and that they also have an incredible and invaluable knowledge and expertise on the fields where policymakers have normally to make good policy. And often knowledge and expertise that we academics don't have. That's why I really think that this kind of encounters are not only interesting, but also necessary to inform and strengthen our academic work. So when in the last few weeks, I had a few interviews with the participants, and I was really incredibly, let's say, informed by and inspired by, let's say, all the expertise and the enriching insights that they brought forward during those interviews. Now, especially on the topic of, let's say, streaming platforms, what is changing every day, as we know, where there is a massive investment cycle to produce original content on the one side, but on the other side, there are also a lot of challenges for the European industry. And now, so of course, with US players leading the dance in this field. And so the question, what is central, I think, in this panel is, what about Europe? What about European players in this field, etc. So we have 2 hours. We have 4 participants representing, let's say, more or less the classic cycle of production, distribution, and exhibition. We have also one very experted academic, as we know. So we have a lot of topics to talk about. We will not be able to deal with everything. This will not be the last debate about, let's say, the challenges of platformization for the European audiovisual industry. But let's start with the discussion. So the first thing I would like to ask to our panelists is that maybe they present themselves very shortly and that they put forward 1 or 2 items that they think are very crucial in the debate. Okay, maybe we can start with the first speaker. Okay. So the first panelist is Guillaume Branders from the International Union of Cinemas. So it's a union or association representing exhibitors and also national exhibitors associations, I thought, in around 40 countries.
39.
39.
Yes. Yeah, I have to change that.
Okay,
so hi everyone, nice to see you all. Thank you for inviting us. So I'm Belgian. I work for UNIC, so it's the International Union of Cinemas, It's called international, but it should be called European. We cover 39 territories in Europe for over 40,000 screens, represent cinemas large and small. We do have amongst our membership some of the biggest cinema chains in the world and in Europe, because they cover multiple territories. But we also have the National Association that represents all the cinemas of all sites within any territory. So for instance, in Portugal, we would have a big chains like NAS. In France, we would also have the FNCF, so the Federation of French Exhibitors, also representing one screen cinema in the country. In terms of what we do, our main purpose is one of lobbying. We represent the interest of cinema operators in front of EU institutions in Brussels, but also at national level. But we also act as an industry forum, which is something that Daniel mentioned, and we discuss quite a broad range of topics related to audience engagement, cinema technology, gender balance in the cinema industry, and you know, a real breadth of topic that I will not mention today. In terms of issues that I would like to highlight, one that is perhaps not too much connected to this conversation, but is definitely the biggest priority for cinema operators in Europe at the moment, is everything related to the current economic crisis and the energy crisis. This is obviously our top priority. When I say we throughout the next 2 hours, I mean cinema operators in Europe. It's extremely challenging for cinema operators at the moment to pay their bill. They're in the process of renegotiating contract with energy providers, which is proving extremely challenging. And this is something where obviously the sector requires support from national and EU institutions. And obviously this has an impact on cinema operation, but also on box office, because of course there's the issue of increasing cost of life. So this is also having an impact on people coming to the cinema at the end of the day. But what we are seeing, and to make a connection to the topic of VOD at the moment, is that people are in fact quite still willing to spend on going out. They're going out less regularly than before, but when they do go out, they want to enjoy themselves and spend money on this outdoor activity. While VOD, strangely enough, because of lockdowns, people turn to VOD quite a lot. But since then, there's been some sort of fatigue, and VOD being something that you pay on a monthly basis and that you can see on your expenses, well, people are actually deciding to spend less sometimes on VOD platforms at the moment. This is what we're seeing. Another very big issue for us at the moment is the lack of content. We've been truly hurt by that. It's been very, very difficult for cinemas to truly recover from the crisis because of this lack of content. Today is a very important day for the sector globally, because today, I don't know if you're aware of this, but today is the release date for Avatar, The Way of Water. And a lot of things depend on this film doing well at the box office. I know we'll be talking a lot about smaller European titles, but this one is extremely important for the sector because, again, lack of content, there's nothing else big at the moment coming out for the next almost 2 months. And this relates to the fact that we're seeing studios since the start of the pandemic, but still today, releasing less films straight to cinema and turning more to Zendiff, which is something that Christian will perhaps also mention later. I don't know, Daniel, if you want me to give an update actually on box office numbers for the sector. It's something that I'm happy to do.
Well, maybe we can go on and then we can come back. Okay, but the next speaker or panelist is Juliette Prissard. We'll have this in English, but 3 of the participants are French speaking, but anyway, we'll do it in English. Huh?
Yes,
please.
I can speak in English.
Donc, Juliette Prissard is representative of, or represents, Eurocinema, and let's say it's an association representing European and international producers and covering issues like copyright and piracy as well, but mainly also issues dealing with policy around film production.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Juliette Prissard, and I do represent producers and at the European level, but maybe more specifically, I do represent French organizations, and also I represent Eurocopia, which is an organization for private copy for European producers. Within this context, I am based in Brussels, and I am trying to advocate for the system of kind of, we would say, exception culturelle, to say roughly, but more specifically, what is my main topic for the moment is there are two main things that I am fighting for or fighting against. So depends on the way we see it. What I'm fighting for is that we still have the choice of economic choice to produce what we want to produce in terms of story, in terms of freedom of creation, and also in terms of economic choices. I try to have the possibility to control the film that we're producing and not being working in the name and on behalf of a broadcaster, whatever it would be in EU. But that's the first topic, and I would say the second topic as well is what kind of works we're going to be asked to do in the future, because for the moment we are telling stories, and the question is in the future will we be asked to do something more like entertainment, metaverse, I don't know, whatever, something that is aimed to satisfy a market rather than be based grounded on the cultural target. Cultural aspects, yes, more or less. That's my two main topics, and I can develop after.
Okay, thank you. Our third panelist is Christine Eloy from she's a general manager of Europa Distribution, and Europa Distribution is an international association of independent film publishers and distributors. Christine.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. It's really nice to share. If you have questions, don't hesitate. I already have a question for you. Actually, who is very aware of what is the job of a distributor? Raise their hands. Okay, I don't know where I started. So what is a distributor? So we are between these two. So when the film is produced, and then it will be exhibited in the different countries, the ones who are taking care for buying the rights for a certain time, a certain language, and then making the film exist in a certain country, that's the distributors. You have, of course, very different kind of distributors. Guillaume was mentioning Avatar. This is released by a major studio, American studios. We represent the independent distributors. So for Belgium, for example, Cinear, you may know, I've seen at the beginning of the film, Cinear is a member. If there are Italians among you, Lucky Red is a member, BIM is a member. In Germany, ProKino is a member. Nationality, so that I can help you maybe through... from where are you from? Spain. Spain, Corriente, Vanda, Avalon, these are members, are independent distributors and members. Of course, not all distributors are members of the association. And what is making the association is a bit like unique, but just on the other direction. So our first goal is to be a place for networking, exchange of good practices, because, you know, by the job of the distributors, because you are buying the rights and then trying to make the film exist and selling it, so having consumers in the cinemas, but then also on VOD and then on DVD, etc. When you buy the film, you don't know how it will work, so it means that sometimes you find yourself in difficult financial situation. So it's very risky, and it's good to know what your colleagues are doing in other countries to try to get inspired by best practices. Also, when it comes to, for example, marketing strategies to release the film. So people also see something else than Avatar or the big American tempos. So that these are the guys and ladies that we are representing. It's written Europa Distribution, but actually it could be world distribution, because we have members now outside Europe, not many. We have 31 countries represented in the association, from Belgium to Australia. So it can be very different realities, but also big trends between all these members, distributors. So our main activity, that I said, was to put them together, organizing training, exchange of best practices. Then we have also, we do also voice sector, and that is European. And so generally it's trying to first explain what is a distributor. So I did to you the super short version. I can go back to that and explain better, because otherwise I need 30 minutes. I have a slide also, just in case at some point we need to explain better. And for us, so as distributor, as I said, your main, so for example, Close, it's released by an independent distributor. So the Belgian distributor with Lumière, he brought the film to the film festival here in Ghent 2 months ago to give him more exposure, then bought publicity, etc., to make the film exist. So now the film is in the cinemas, but then it will follow what we call the window. So it will go also on TV, then it will be on pay TV, then free TV, as well, etc., etc. So for us, what is important is to be able to exploit our films in all these windows. Most important one being clearly cinema. And for us, so that's what will be my point, is all actually platforms who are a new booth for us, but all it is so much of a new booth or not, actually, yeah, because that brings me to my second point, is all consumer citizens are using these platforms, and where do they go, what do they watch, etc. So all these two are evolving constantly. Of course, the pandemic and the lockdown have pushed at some point everybody to the platform, but we notice the same is that now we are going back, but not back as before, so it's somewhere in between. So it's a constant change, and I think it's really interesting to keep discussing it, to try to maybe understand what could be the trends, even if I don't know for you. If you do, I'm interested. I don't have any crystal ball. If you do have one that works, I'm very, very interested. So voilà, that's me.
Merci, Christine. And fourth panelist is Tim Raats. Please, Tim.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tim Raats. I'm from the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. Country, I'm like the anti-Daniel. I work in Brussels but live in Ghent. Daniel lives in Brussels but works in Ghent. Daniel is specialized in film. I'm specialized in television, but nevertheless I'm invited. Thanks a lot for that. I work at SMIT, and it's a research institute connected to the university. And within SMIT, we're about 110 researchers at the moment. And within SMIT, I coordinate the work on media economics and media policy. So we're now about 22 researchers, of which in the past 7 years, most of them have focused on streaming algorithms, shifting production cultures and distribution, mostly with a focus on television. We try to get much more into cinema, because it has been overlooked in scholarly work when it comes to impact of platforms. I myself am very interested in what this all means, the whole shift and platformization for policies, because I do see an enormous paradigm shift for screen agencies, film funds in Europe, and how they will need to reposition, because everything is happening at a much faster pace. But yeah, the whole budgeting cycle of European film with screen funding involved, public funding, it goes quite slow. So that puts pressure on screen agencies. But also, for example, a lot of European countries are now imposing investment obligations. But we see that in practice, most of these investments are targeted at, in practice, television content, because for these players, investment in television content is more interesting than in film. So I'm also thinking about the regulation with regard to prominence and what it means to have content prominent, because European audiovisual policy requires content from platforms to be prominent in catalogs. But actually, all member states are just transposing this. But the question is, what is prominent? Is it the number of seconds you have to scroll because it's different from everyone, for everyone because of personalization? Is it how you can search content? For example, Netflix is one of the few catalogs where you can, if you type in French, that you actually get French content. In most other players, if you type in French, you only get titles with the word French in it. So it's also a question about metadata, labeling, and so on. So that's something that we're looking at for the moment. And I'm also a board member of the Flanders Audiovisual Fund, so maybe I can also bring some elements from there into the discussion. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Okay, maybe the first question is not to go look into the future, Christine. We will not do that. So please, maybe we can look back. So we are now in a time of players, big players having a disease like fear of missing out, coming into the field, starting streaming platforms, etc. But what has been so far? What has been the impact of all those streamers on the European audiovisual industry? Is it a good thing, or is it a bad thing, or is it, of course, it's much more complex? But what has been, according to you, the impact so far of all the new streamers being on the market, targeting audiences, maybe challenging, of course, the traditional window of cinema, but maybe from your perspective, what has been so far the most important impact? Maybe Guillaume?
Sure.
I know this is a big question. I know.
Yeah, I'm not going to bring any like deep answer to it, but what it has definitely done is that it has changed the general business model. There are multiple business models now out there. What's for sure is that rather than focusing on the impact of platform, I would focus on the impact of the pandemic in the past 2 years, and this has really, accelerated existing trends. It has helped platform grow. I don't know if I'm not using it perfectly, but it has helped those platforms grow quite exponentially in the past 2 years. But we've also seen, as I mentioned, some sort of VOD fatigue and a return to other types of entertainment at the moment. And we're seeing it with the studios. If you look at some of the biggest studios, those people who believed that the only future was VOD have been fired in recent weeks and have been replaced by people who we don't know for sure what they think is the future of the industry. They are being more pro-cinema, but they are also more pro-cinema because they want to make sure that they sound as different as possible than the people that they're replacing, let's face it. So yes, for instance, it's interesting to see that David Zaslav, the CEO of Warner and Discovery, he said in an interview 2 weeks ago that he's seen the numbers and that releasing a film in cinema first brings 5 times more money than having it straight to VOD. But at the same time, we all know that comparing VOD and cinema revenue is absolutely not the same thing.
Can you expand on this?
We're in fact not looking at revenue for VOD. For cinema, it's very clear, it's box office. It's how many people go to the cinema and how much they spend on tickets. It's a very easy to find number. Tim Raats will very easily find this number when he collects it for any title in Europe or globally. When for VOD platforms, what they care about is subscriber. And this is how they make revenue at the end of the day, by going to a quarterly investor call, saying that they've seen a growth in subscriber for their platform. Then investors put more money in the platform, and this is how they will actually make revenue. So we're comparing two very, very different things. It's almost like comparing apple and pears, as we might say in French or Flemish, I guess. So this has proved sometimes very difficult as well in our conversation with policymakers in Brussels, because it's almost a different business entirely in a way. And to be honest, we always say that as cinema operator, that in a way our main competition isn't really VOD. It's more going to the restaurant, going to a bar, and other out-of-home activity. It becomes a competition in the sense that it is influencing the broader business model, financing model of the global and European cinema industry.
Okay, thank you. Juliette, what is your view on this?
Well, if you allow me to go just a little bit back, and then I will say what I think about the arrival of the streamers. Previously we had a system where we had a film, roughly at the European level, we had film. Each member state had film agencies. These film agencies are founded by endowed by money from the government or taxes, like in France, from the broadcasters. These money are on the selective way, automatic way, financing the film. On the other hand, at the European level, we have this regulation from the AVMS directive, and previously it was called Television Without Frontier. This obligation would provide that, are providing still, for the moment, that an obligation to broadcast European films. And then that would protect diversity, and it is grounded on the Treaty of Functioning of the Europe, Article 167, and it's a cultural cultural article saying that we must protect that diversity and culture. Roughly, there are the two pillars on which we are working currently, and then still for the moment it's still the case, and all the rules that we are abiding by are deriving from this reasoning. So okay, now for the streamers, I would say that the first thing that is going on is that we have high speed now internet. 10 years ago this arrived, so I would say that the arrival of streamers came slowly, but also it dates back far before the COVID. I would date it from the moment we were able to see a film on streaming with our internet provider at home. So it dates back 10 years ago. But what COVID has done is that everybody would have Netflix or Amazon on his TV. Even a grandmother of 90 years old is able to use Netflix or to use Amazon, because it's very easy to plug in and to use. So this thing is that now it has arrived with a high prime series that competes with the local production. Okay, so now once we have said such a thing, all the system that we have built in the past is shaped and is fragilized. It's fragilized because our system is, I would say, not recouped on an international market first, and also because the money that is invested is more doomed to aim to provide information and creation from local authors, local investors, and it's the competition with this high market contents is extremely difficult. Okay, so also because we have been trained on this with all this politic of local politic and all this landscape that we have built before, to be on an offer logic, not on a demand logic. We are trying to push something that people would not expect. So that's the idea that, okay, you are going to the cinema, and you are relying on the cinema because they have chosen a film, because you know the cinema, they are good, and you are choosing a film, and maybe you have seen the trailer, of course, but you still want to take a risk. This idea of taking a risk and going into an offer logic, offer logic, and say, okay, I want to see something, I'm not sure it's going to be good. Maybe I have wasted my money, but that's not a problem, because I am ready to waste my money even if I don't like it, because maybe even if I don't like it, that something will remain out of it, and I'm happy with that. This idea is becoming more and more difficult to stand now that we have this huge amount of images coming from abroad, and with very spectacular images and so on. And I would also say that there is a big influence on social medias, because everybody is very much used now to have these very quick images, and we do these slots, and it's moving all the time, the short videos, and people don't have the patience, and are very impatient, and they are less and less ready to go into a cinema and stop to have 2 or 4 screens in the same, well, no, not 2 or 4, but 2 screens in the same time, and doing eating and speaking with friends and doing many things in the same time. So when you are in a cinema, or even when you are looking a film really of 1 hour and a half, you are supposed to concentrate yourself, one task, one only thing, and this thing we don't do it anymore. I mean, not in the children, but all of us. So also this has changed a lot of things. I can say many things.
Yes, but then you're talking about a change in the experience and the
Yes.
attitude of consumer,
Yeah.
Offer, etc., offer or demand. But is the arrival of the streamers, what are is it a good thing for the producers, European producers? Is it an opportunity,
Yes.
or especially for European producers?
Yes. Okay. For European producers, it's a huge opportunity if I'm speaking about money. To be clear, we're working a lot, and there's not a problem of having an agenda of a turnover, and then we are making, well, not a lot of money, but we are working. That's not the problem. That's not the idea. That's not the topic I want to raise, because of course we can be hired on a commissioning basis by streamers or even by TV broadcasters now very often, and we are working. We have a margin on the budget, and that's fine. But of course, what I would advocate for is the idea that we could still have the choice to, if it's fine to do this, and we have been doing this even before the streamers, working on what we call in France production executive, meaning commissioning basis. We have been doing that for many years, so that's not the problem, and that's good, for the company. You earn some money, you margin on the budget, and that's fine. The thing is that what is in stake is cultural diversity, because what we need to keep is to keep the economic choice to keep control of the films. What is important is that we still have the choice to say, okay, I have met an author, I think the story is wonderful, and I go to see financiers, and the financiers say, with the story and the cast that you suggest me, then please do the film. Then I take the film, I gather the budget, and with this budget, and then I make the film, and I take the risk of its completion. This is okay when I finish it and I feel the film, and that's my risk. And in consideration of this risk, I keep the control of the film. I mean, I have the ownership of the film, and also the receipts deriving from its exploitation. All this, what we call in France, production déléguée, and we say before we would say just production, help us to have some catalog, and this catalog is absolutely essential, because with this catalog are able to go to the bank and find some money for new projects, and to be able to be in a position to suggest some new ideas. All this is put at stake with the arrival of the streamers, and that's the way we like to work, and we want to keep our possibility to have a freedom of creation for our authors, and the freedom of entrepreneurship for our companies. We want still to be independent, because we are independent producers.
Okay, thank you, Juliette. Christine, I know that independent distributors also like to go into streaming. I know in Belgium, for instance, there are a few independent distributors who have launched their own streaming platform. But how does Europa Distribution look at the streaming wars and streaming business right now?
Well, for us, it's really linked to our members wherever they are. So it includes Belgium, but it also includes Romania, Lithuania, Portugal, or Australia. And before coming for today, I have to say that in the beginning, for us, it was VOD was hopefully the replacement for DVD. That it would be the new way to watch films, a new booth actually. So it was definitely not an enemy. It's still not an enemy, but it was a new way to exploit your films that would enter that window, the chronology I was mentioning earlier. Now what we have seen is that it has evolved through the years, because indeed it has started quite longer before the pandemic. It is so different from a country to another. Well, we are in Belgium. Actually, for your information, most of distributors in Belgium are also in the Netherlands and Luxembourg. So it works. It's Benelux. So generally, you have one office in Belgium covering Belgium and Luxembourg, and you have one office in the Netherlands covering the Netherlands. So it means that obviously it's the same company, of course, most of the time, with two teams, one here, one there. Sometimes it's only one team, but I'm explaining this to say that what is behind the distributor, the will, the films they will release, they will promote, it's the same, of course. It's the same company, but with two offices. And we see huge differences between the countries. It's really different. It is working actually quite well in the Netherlands, where there is more maturity, more appetite also to look also for independent films, because again, our films are more the films you will find in Berlin or in Cannes or in Toronto or in Venice, the ones that don't go to the streamer, or the points on the streamer as the acquisition thing. So there are very, very big differences. For example, Italy, a very big country, VOD is excessively small, but they have a big pay TV. So actually at some point during a pandemic, we couldn't have our usual activity. So what we've done to keep distributors in the scope of discussion, political also, we had a lot of interviews of our members, because distribution, actually you're very representative of everybody, except no one knows what we are and what we do. So it was also good to just bring a little bit of concrete stuff in the reading. So we had this series. And we took also the opportunity as an association to use this interview to have a little bit of data. So one of the questions was actually to see how their revenues were. So of course, this is that data pre-pandemic or in pandemic. So it has probably changed. So we will go back to that. But it goes from 0 on VOD. That's the case of Austria, because Austria, the rights are actually handled by Germany. And Germany gives only the theatrical rights to the Austrian distributors, so that's the right to exploit in the cinemas. So they can't exploit on VOD. So it's done from Germany. And on the other side, so this is an extreme, they are there. Next to that, you have Italy with like 2 to 5% of their revenues from VOD. So you don't need me to tell you that it's very low. And then on the other side, you have the Netherlands, Sweden with 30%. So it's and probably more now. So it's also how you exploit your film, and I was explaining before that, you know, the distributors, it's also about risk. I mean, if you don't have a gambling mind, don't become a distributor. I mean, I'm okay to do the association. I could never be one myself. It's impossible. I mean, because you're always taking risk, not knowing what will happen to you. And this is actually somehow streaming has increased the risk, because before you knew that you would exploit your titles in the cinemas, and then DVD would be a very, how to say, a stable share of what you would do in the cinema. So I knew with I was working for a distributor. I was not a boss. I was just an employee for a distributor in the Benelux for Cinear. And I knew when we had released the film, what would be more or less, you know, how many DVDs we would sell. I knew, everybody knew, because it was always more or less the same calculation. That is not really working with the streamers. Because then, you know, we are speaking about platforms, but then you have SVOD, TVOD, premium VOD, DN data, AVOD. I mean, every week there seems to be a new VOD, so you have to adapt to it. And then also, again, you have the difference of countries, because, for example, here we have a lot of choice. I did a check yesterday on Just Watch. You may know that a website that is giving you for every country all the platform, and if you are looking for a film, not all, that's the thing, nearly all. And if you're looking for a film, you can maybe find it there. So I just did the exercise to check on the Belgian platforms, because that's the only thing I can see from Belgium. And then they are not all there. For example, Lumière, which is the platform for a distributor and exhibitor in Ghent, is not in. And otherwise, it was 33 plus at least one. So at least 34 platforms, only for Belgium. I mean, and that is not counting like Cheval magazine, because that also exists, and you have the platform where you have everything on horses, etc., etc. So joke aside, it's true. In France, they have like Cheval magazine. I have not invented that to make you laugh. So that's already. Probably chasse et pêche and other stuff the French like. And so to say that it's very difficult to have a generalization, because the realities are very different. What we can see is that in most cases, what we have lost at some point, we haven't gained back. So this is very important for us. And then also, and I totally agree that, you know, we have to mix all this with the pandemic, because it has changed. So we have seen definitely in certain countries that of course, the consumption of a platform has raised during the pandemic, but as it is for the books also, and all the, I don't know, you say that in English, jeux de société, like Pictionary and this sort of stuff, because, you know, board games, because you're at home, you don't know what to do, and maybe you're even in a country when you can't go out, so you have to find something. And now it's leveling. Big question for us, because of course we need to have the audiences in the cinemas, but also actually on there so far to also watch our films, so both are important for us, is to try to understand also where is the consumer nowadays, because there are new habits. I mean, we probably have, all of us here have changed something, you know, evenings since the pandemic, because we had to, and we have kept something. So it's understanding how it goes. Definitely there is something we have seen also. That's not so much platformization, it's also linked to that, to the event. So you go to the cinema to see Avatar, or to see Close, or to see The Boy from Heaven, La Conspiration du Caire. But then all the other films that are not bad, they are not seen. And it's the same online. Everybody is going to see the same stuff all the time. So it's just like the rest. You have a sea of content out there in the cinemas, maybe not the one that is bringing you the people in, but you have content. There is content, but you don't have the people that matching the content all the time. So this is quite frightening because it means that if we can't inverse a little bit the trends and have again, and we are all working on that. It's of course we are not sitting on the chairs just talking like now, but it is slow. It is very slow. Again, depends on the country. Some have more facilities to recover. We have also to put into that, and that's also where you are, as academics probably can help, is to understand how culturally things have evolved. So also because again, Belgium is not the Netherlands, that is not Spain, that is not Portugal or whatever, but also see how people are maybe moving, what are their priorities. Also again, the crisis is definitely something that is also entering into that. And I can't only join so much what Juliette was saying, is that what is extremely important in all this is to keep cultural diversity, because I mean, I think you need to have Avatar and you need to have Close, but you also need to have that Romanian documentary that, less people will go and see, but still you want to have it because it's an important film. And all this has to live together. And this is really important we keep that.
And that's a very important point that has been mentioned by all of us, is that accessibility is not everything, Obviously, cinemas are physically limited. They can only show a certain amount of film per year on their screen. I would say that depending on the country, again, there would be around between 400 or 800 films being shown for the first time in the cinema in any given year in a European country. It will really vary very much from one country to another. When you know that just in Europe, you have 1,800 films that are produced every year. Just in the US, you have 500 films produced every year. So we're well above the 2,000 or 3,000 internationally. So all those films cannot be shown in cinema. So obviously, VOD platforms can play a massive role in making that diversity of title accessible. But accessibility is not everything, because as Tim said, it all depends on how those films are then promoted on these platforms, and also promoted in cinema and on every different so-called platforms. I would also say cinema as a platform in that sense, on any media, really, because you do have a lot of films that are made available, but that are not promoted. So nobody knows they exist, nobody will see them, and that can be quite a huge challenge, because it's not enough. And this is something that for policymakers, it should really be high on the agenda, because they always focus on accessibility, because people want to be able to see anything at any time, anywhere. Because people have to cool down a little. They don't, again, we don't watch 3,000 films a year. So it would be very, very important in the future to focus much more on promotion. At least that's our point of view as cinema operators. And cinema operators have to play a role in that promotion. The distributors have to play a role, but basically everybody in the value chain has to be involved in that process.
Thank you. Tim, how do you look back at the arrival of streamers and the impact on European audiovisual industry? I know it's a big question.
When you asked me this question the first time, I think I wrote 8 different impacts. Trying to take a bit of a helicopter view, I think we have to say that the most important impact is that streamers have created a direct link with the consumers. That a lot of film producers and distributors unfortunately don't have. And so they compete for viewer attention, they compete for viewer spending, for the money of the consumer. The more the fiercer the platform wars are played out, the more price is becoming a very important distinctive strategy of these platforms to separate themselves, which is why Netflix is now also launching an advertisement tier. A second thing is, of course, what has been said already, the pressure on windows. So not only shortening windows, but also creating new windows. in COVID, we have seen this near cinema. I don't know the official name of the window, but films that were released very close to, very soon after they were released in cinema. That became an experiment that you see more and more popping up in VOD catalogs. So at the same time, you see that how rights are arranged, it has become much more complicated. It not only goes a lot faster, but it's also a lot complicated, more complicated with different territories, different rights that used to be connected to one windows and are now split into several windows. So that makes it very difficult, I think, for both producer, distributor, and exhibitor point of view. I think the whole rights discussion has also, and the importance of rights and exclusive content has also resulted in traditional big players, the Hollywood players, trying to keep as many rights as possible for themselves. And he who owns the rights, owns the content, has the power. So that means that we saw a first wave where a lot of content was pulled back from platforms like Netflix. Then that accelerated the pace in which players like Netflix started doing their own originals. Then you had a second phase where legacy players like Warner, then you have Peacock, you have all these US legacy players now launching their own services, now also coming to Europe. But that also means that they commission content in an entirely different way, and they make a distinction between the films that they put on direct-to-consumer models and the films that they put in cinemas. And that means that for cinemas, they will most likely privilege blockbuster content and maybe genre content, horror usually still does well in cinema. But it also means that a lot of titles that used to score well in cinema are not even given a chance anymore to be released in cinema. And that's quite problematic because on the level of the consumer, it also creates new expectations of cinema and new associations with cinema. And I don't want cinema to, or at least the multiplex experience, to evolve into this idea of having only the Marvel Avengers kind of titles. It's a bit presented simplistic, but you get what I mean. But this also creates, for smaller countries, a lot of difficulties. A typical Flemish film, a thriller, a typical police thriller. We had one, Ritual Ritueel, did not perform well in Belgian cinemas because this type of content is something that you would easily find. You would find 30 Scandinavian crime dramas that are maybe better on a VOD platform. So for a producer in Flanders, that creates new challenges as to what will find its way to the audience. And it's very difficult to still stick to your cultural identity, make good quality films, and at the same time make appealing content for a broad audience. Then another factor is, of course, the fact that these platforms are driven by a recommender system logic that is either driven by personalization or by curation, and curation is then the content that they want you to see. If Squid Game becomes a hit or Wednesday, then it's because Netflix wants you to see it. It's not because the entire world suddenly has a real appetite for South Korean thrillers. And that also makes it very difficult for feature films to be found on these platforms. Because if you think about the logic of an algorithm, it is designed to make you watch as long as possible. And it is designed to pop up content that is very recognizable. So that means that television series are much higher in the, always much higher, more prominent than feature films, let alone European feature films. So that's also problematic, I think. And then maybe a last aspect that wasn't discussed before is that it also, from a production point of view, the advent of streaming has also created new conceptualizations of locality and what is authentic and local. And in our field, we have a whole tradition about transnationalization, transnational cultures, and so on in film studies, television studies. But what you see is that these streaming platforms have really challenged the existing paradigm of how films are funded. For example, we see that almost all Netflix original films are not co-productions anymore between several countries. So that's already going against the decade-long tradition of funding film in Europe. A second thing is that they try to connect to audiences by allowing very local stories, authentic stories, also not demanding too much in terms of quality expectations, but yet you do see that there is some new sense of authenticity or locality that is added. For example, a Flemish film like Ferry, which is a Netflix original, you could see it as very Flemish, very Dutch, but at the same time, it is written by writers who try to appeal to what a global audience wants. And that also creates new formulaic, no formatted content. In the same way, we have found in our research that, for example, Netflix has a very strange behavior towards diversity, because Netflix has really challenged existing players in Europe to be more diverse, to be more inclusive, to invest more in young talent. But at the same time, they have also created this universal, let's say, universal formula of what diversity needs to be. I'll make it very concrete with an example. There is a series, I won't say which one because I'm not allowed to, I think, where a character, a diverse character, was replaced by another ethnicity that is more universal. A cleaning lady in that country had another ethnicity than in the book on which it is based, than in the series, because it had to be more universal, diverse. So it creates it negotiates authenticity, inclusion, diversity, and a new way, and a constant tension between globalization and then being very cultural proximity, or adopting cultural proximity.
Thank you, Tim. You referred to the Netflix original and all the issue of locality, Europeanness, and globality. Some of those Netflix original have been subsidized or co-financed by local or national agencies, film agencies, meaning, in a sense, that local agencies, national agencies are subsidizing Hollywood. And we have been referring to Avatar a bit to Hollywood, but I think it's still the elephant in the room. The US dominance of the streaming business is huge. And of course, we have a long tradition within academia of dealing with American imperialism, etc., all those stupid ideas. But how do you look at it from the industry's position? So this dominance and ever-growing dominance, so it seems, of Hollywood.
I think there are different ways to look at this, obviously, but there's kind of a risk of thinking that this is the only solution. There's no maybe we can create a European blockbuster, but there haven't been European blockbusters so far for a reason, because we do have this particularity of enjoying diversity of content. A perfect example is a film like Perfetti Sconosciuti in Italy, which was a huge box office hit in Italy. It's a film about three couples putting their phones in front of them at a dinner and allowing each other to look at the text message they receive during the evening, and chaos ensues, of course. And this film attracted loads of other distributor producers in other countries, but who felt that there was no way for this Italian film to be taken as it is in their country. So they bought the right for the concept and they created their own national version. So this is now the film that is in the Guinness Book of Records for having most remakes. I think it has over 23, something like that, in multiple language, when it's always the same concept. And this is kind of the beauty of European diversity, because it's a film that if you combine the box office of all those remakes, it's we're talking about hundreds of millions of euros. It's a huge success, but it doesn't abide by the definition of a US blockbusters in any way, even though we're talking about something that made as much money as the US blockbusters. And we know you gave the example of what streaming platforms are doing now in terms of creating like international diversity or whatever. We know that the studios have been trying to do that for a very long time by focusing on Chinese audience. Disney only made the remake of Mulan to attract a Chinese audience, and this filmed very, very, very hard because China didn't want this, and they decided to simply not show the film in their country. So there's obviously a huge risk of going for that type of approach.
Okay. But your example of Avatar, doesn't it mean that the exhibitors are to a large extent dependent on US blockbusters?
They obviously rely a lot on US blockbusters. I mean, you've probably all seen the numbers. Again, it depends from a country to another. In a country like Bulgaria, I think the market share for US films is anywhere between 80 and 90% on any given year. In a country like France, it can be as low as 50%, but 50% is quite a lot of money. So, you know, it will really vary from one country to another, but it brings us back to what we said about diversity. Yes, Avatar is fundamental because it will bring a lot of money to cinema operators globally, but without all the other titles, and this is why I say that we're lacking content, well, we can't really survive in the long term. You need the national blockbusters, you need the national titles that will cater to other audience genres. And this is something that was an issue, again, well before platforms and so on. For instance, in cinema, we've always been talking about the lack of films for young women, for families, because again, for families, weirdly enough, you only have Disney who were making those one film a season for families, and then there's nothing else. When there is a huge appetite for those titles. If, to give a very concrete example, if you look now at the top 10 box office in Germany, there's a Norwegian Christmas movie, and there's no reason for a Norwegian movie to make it into the German top 10. And this is only because German audience want to see Christmas films, but there's nothing else available out there. There's no German Christmas movies being produced at the moment for reasons that I don't know, but it's quite interesting to see how you're still like missing audiences. And the solution is definitely not to something that will fit every audience, because that doesn't really exist.
Juliette, how do you look at this US dominance on the streaming level, and how does it influence European producers?
Okay, I made my list also. Okay, so it's jeopardizing the subsidies that are being given to the producers, in a way that for the moment the current system is saying that roughly the film agencies give some subsidies to the producer when when they want to finance a film, to produce a film that is not that much expected by the market. So on a selective basis, they give money. Now with this tax incentive race to obtain more and more local productions from the streamers, it's changing the deal. So Italy has put some tax incentive extremely interesting for the producers, but also for the streamers, and the streamers are benefiting from it now. And so same from France, from of course in Belgium, of course, and so it's growing more and more. And then, you know, the idea, of course, again, of selecting projects on an artistic point of view is more and more remoting now. I would also say that this competition between member states is not a good thing, because it jeopardizes the co-production system. Which is again a tool for being able to tell stories that are aimed to a local audience. Okay, something less that you less know that just before is that when you have a 30% quota of European films that is provided into the EVMS directive, Article 13.1, it is full of Netflix films. So these films are Netflix or Amazon or whatever. They are produced locally. I would take an example in France or in La Casa de Papel in Spain. It is produced by a platform. It has been in Casa de Papel has been done by TV3 at the beginning, and the second season it was bought by Netflix. All the decisions are taken in California. All the casting is decided in California. All the budget is supervised in California, and all the story is done according to algorithmic reason for algorithmic reasons according to the subscribers. And I would say the same for Lupin in France and Gomorrah in Italy, and so on and so on. So all these quota, 30% quota, is fulfilled by these firms, and we don't have the rights of the catalogs go to California as well. So we have I would say sovereignty, cultural diversity problem instead. Same for the investment obligations, because in the same directive, Article 13.2, it is provided that the member states can grab the possibility to impose to the streamers some obligation to produce locally. Same, it can be also production that are totally driven by California, I mean, artistically speaking and financially speaking. And I would say that finally, and maybe I would have liked to say that before, the main consequence in our sector of the arrival of the streamers is the concentration of the production. All the producers independent producers are very fragile now. We have a lot of turnover, and we have a lot of jobs. True, but for less and less people, all the independent and small production companies are bought back or just vanished, and we have big groups that are being created, more and more big, specifically in the audiovisual sector, and we are more and more financed by investment funds. So equity money is coming into the market, and that means a lot. Because, before, everybody would laugh when we would say, okay, are you sure that you're going to earn money with your film that you're producing? I mean, nobody is sure that the film will be a success, nobody. Cinematographically speaking, or even for television. There is no, I mean, you can have a margin on your budget, but you're never going to be rich with that. So if you want to have the market money that comes into inequity into your film, that means that you need to have some kind of you need to be sure that it will be profitable. And for that, you need to produce big films, marketable, and no matter if it's good or not, it is just appealing to the public because it's made to appeal to what the public expects. So the fact that the film is bad at the end is not really the topic. I mean, for the subscribers, so you subscribe because you want a samurai film and it lacks to be so cool. It appears to be so cool. I mean, the film is not good. It's not the point. Not that much the point. So also it raises the question of scheduled obsolescence in the way that all these films, what will happen with all these films that are financed with the tax incentive, meaning that all our money, I mean the public money, I mean the citizens' money, and what is this catalogs will go to California, and what will be their value in the next 10 years? We are, I think, facing a financial bubble, and I really believe that it will change pretty soon, and it is already changing, like, as you know, because they are changing their targets now, and they are producing more and more non-scripted programs per sport, because it is too risky to carry on like this, producing big series. It is too expensive.
Thank you, Juliette, for this quite pessimistic picture. And we will come back at the end of the Q&A and the panel on what to expect from EU policy and national policy makers. But maybe, Christine, what is your view on this Hollywood dominance, ever-growing dominance in the streaming business?
For distributors, it's already the case before, not a big change there. I mean, for us before, I'm in distribution for 22 years now. And obviously, I mean, if you look at the cinemas, you have big differences between, if you see in Ghent, you have the Kinepolis Ghent, you have the Studioscope, you have the Sphinx. They don't have the same kind of programming. So it can be crossed. So you may have, I don't know, we are in Belgium. So if you release a film from the Dardenne, you can release the Dardenne here, also in the Kinepolis, clearly. If you do that in Romania, won't do, because it's perceived in another way. So depending on the country you are, also the perception of the film as maybe more risky / art or dangerous words, because that's not close stuff, but that's more or less like we can see. And the films that are more coming as an entertainment point of view, and so also maybe more produced in the view of having a blockbuster. It has always been the case, and yeah. So no change there. Here we had already in Belgium. It's not a good example on. It's not France, so we are far from 50-50 on the difference between US films, blockbusters, and other. So Belgian, European, rest of the world kind of film. I mean, I haven't seen the box office for quite a while, but it's around 76, 78 when I was in distribution percent per year. So, so that doesn't change that much. I guess that the big question now it's more about really impacts what the audience wants to see. And so Juliette was mentioning now non-scripted content and sport. Before that, it was series, and you have more and more people, watching now series. And so the idea to go and see a film goes back to what we were saying before. It has to be an event, and being an American blockbuster, an Avatar that people are waiting for, or La Conspiration du Caire, A Boy from Heaven, because it's wonderful. You see the trailer, you want to see it. It has so many, stars in the press, etc., etc. So this is more there. Then also for us, but that's a parallel conversation. Is that because here we speak about the streamers concentrating more on Netflix. There is not only Netflix. I mean, for us streamers, it's all the platforms. So it means that the Lumière platform, Ciné-Chez-Vous, etc. This is also a platform for us. A movie that is very well known and established is also a platform. So they also bring their own identity, as we all do, producers and distributors and cinemas. We all have, our lineup or the kind of catalog we want to work on. So it is really depending on your own choices. And what we see, but it's changing, every day. So is that at some point then the bigger platforms, but so bigger like a Netflix, but also a movie would be on markets buying films. So that means that as a distributor, you wouldn't access them, even if they're not especially released theatrically in the cinema, but they have the rights, so it's not there for you. So but it was happening also before with the American majors, so it's not very new. Again, it's just one more, 2 or 5. It's just more. So for certain names, where you also have heard about Sorrentino doing a series, and then Jane Campion, while they are doing their series, they are not available to do a film that we would release and work on. But this is apparently also a little bit changing now, that they are less in that crazy, I have my basket, I'm going to Cannes. I'm taking all the films I can to have it. But, again, that's why I really would like to have a crystal ball to know what would be the next move, so we can also a little bit foresee, but it's changing a lot. My guess is also actually that they are, for what we see, what we hear, what we read, is that it is coming away from films. So that's like, that's one less. And there you have series and then sport and non-scripted content. So that means that as a competitor on the market, maybe there will be less there, but there will still be a competitor of time. And I agree, it's not only about, platforms and cinema, you also have the restaurants and, playing board game at home or reading a book. But the more we have, the less it's easy to release the films. And if we can't release the films together, then at some point, the money is not flowing, because you will spend money to make a film, there is no money coming back, then you will do less films, etc., etc., etc. And we speak about the film value chain. It's really a value chain and an ecosystem. So I mean, the big point of an ecosystem is that if you touch a part of the ecosystem, it's all the ecosystem that is then impacted. And this is very true. Is that how will that all impact the way we are working? It can be so positively, because UNIC has this film days a few weeks ago, and I was there, and we were also discussing of, that can be an opportunity. but there is a big elephant in the room that is a consumer, and we don't know exactly what they want, and we will never know. That's where you all academics, if you can do, good research on consumers, that would be so nice everywhere in your precise granularity. That will help. This is something that, you only have a little touch of it.
Just I wanted to add something about the fact that, because you tell me I'm pessimistic on the fact that if we don't have some regulation, it will be a problem in the very near future. American money, US money is good money. That's not a problem. We are very happy to have investors that are coming into the local market. That's not the point. The point is that they must stay where they must stay. We must have some room of maneuver to produce our own films the way we want. We need to have the economic choice to keep being able to do our films. And we can also produce the American films locally, that's fine. But we need to have both. Otherwise, the idea of the motto united into diversity will just vanish. That's not the idea.
Tim, can we revitalize our US hegemony theories from the 1980s?
Well, I think it's more nuanced because you could easily say, the dominance of American content is still there. But I think if you dissect the different layers, it's really more nuanced. And I'm not so pessimistic in that sense that if you look at the VOD catalogs of the biggest players, so the four biggest players in Europe are American streamers, take up more than 80% of the total market. They are required to have more than 30% of the European content in their catalogs. For the first time, in general, they do. Disney is still lagging behind. But for example, Netflix in Flanders, we did a mapping, has approximately 42% European content in its catalog. So, and if you then think about the struggles of Europe that we faced in production and distribution for the past 3 to 4 decades, then I do see some optimistic things as well. How many people of us have seen a Spanish series before Casa de Papel on DVD or on VOD, transactional VOD? Not that many. The most successful Flemish film in all time is now a Christmas movie, unfortunately. The Klaus Family. Millions of people have seen it on Netflix. And if I ask around at students as well, most of the students have seen some of the Swedish films, have seen some of the Italian films in these catalogs, whereas I think despite the fact that all kinds of organizations have done so many efforts in the past 2 decades to increase circulation of European content, we did not get there. We did not, our existing ways of doing it did not make a difference either. And so what platforms have done is just tapped into what is already there and consolidate that. And in that sense, I'm also optimistic for sometimes if I see the top 10s and I see a Spanish movie being the most watched movie, if the top 10s are correct, I don't know. Then I'm also a bit optimistic. What I also wanted to add, because you said a bit earlier, Daniel, that film funds are now subsidizing films that go directly on or productions that go directly on Netflix. I think for most European countries, the screen agencies, there are still requirements for these films to be released in cinema. But these films end up on Netflix in some part of the life cycle of the film, usually after they have been funded fully. But there are, and this is a very interesting point, there are discussions on should we abandon the requirement that there needs to be a cinema release to subsidize a Flemish film, for example. That was a discussion that we had a couple of months ago. Luckily, we stuck to that obligation. But for example, the Danish Film Institute, one of the leading European film institutes, has abandoned that obligation a couple of years ago. So it does create a very difficult situation, I think, for small markets. But in the end, for me, the essence is if you add it all up, all different pieces of the pie, and if you look at what is available to fund European film, is there more now because of streaming? Looking at the negative impact that streaming platforms have on existing structure, do the benefits outweigh the disadvantages? Then the answer is no, not at all. A film could be released, a very successful Flemish film could be released and be watched by 5 million people on Netflix, yet the money they get from Netflix, I think you can't do much better than 5 million people watching your title. People in Flanders, on average, the most successful Flemish film for the moment is Cilium, has 500,000, which is an enormous success for Flanders. So if 5 million is an enormous success, the money they got for that title does not even make the dependence from public support obsolete. So that means that there is, as long as we have this discrepancy between the money that you need to put in a production and what you can get out of it in distribution, in revenue, and if that is not more than what you need to put in it, then you have a problem. And for European films, I guess in some larger markets, you can, of course, recoup all your investment without being dependent on public funding. But in smaller markets, it's absolutely impossible, even for the most successful titles.
Thank you. Before giving the floor some voice here, the Q&A, I have one major topic to be discussed, maybe is policy. So it has been mentioned a few times. Juliette was referring to the quota and the investment obligation. But if you could have a wish list for EU policymakers, what would be on it to improve all the production, distribution and exhibition environment for European players? Maybe you should.
I have many, but what is key for me, what we're advocating for is a clear definition of what is a European work. Because when we say that there is a 30% corridor for European films, and that are, for instance, Spanish films that are being seen, or the problem is that what if it's 100% Netflix film all done in Netflix house, it's complicated. So we are trying to advocate for a clarification of what is a European work, and obtain that when a film is European, it has to be in majority financed by a European producer, and also and that the intellectual property of the film stays in Europe. So that we have a more balanced situation toward the streamers. And of course, we have this problem with as well the UK film, because the UK film are still considered as European, which is in per se a good thing. But the problem is that in UK, actually, these are majoritarily American films because of co-productions. So the co-productions between UK and US are fulfilling the 30% corridor. And we are waiting for some figures to have a precise figures on that. And I would also say that the second thing I would like to do is to reinforce the criteria of independence. Because for the moment, I don't want to, of course, each member state is free to have a special definition of what is an independent film and producer. But I think that we should reinforce it and say that the independent film is a producer and film where the creative control is kept by the producer. And this is very important. And finally, I would finally say that we are currently in the midst of a battle at the European level on the text called Media Freedom Act. Maybe you have heard of it, but anyway, the topic is interesting in the way that it makes a confusion, the whole text. It's about pluralism of media, between what is a media, what is audiovisual production and cinema production, what is a media, and what is the press. And all this is merged into a same pot. And it's important that we qualify what we are doing as in the different sectors of activity. I mean, press is press, The media is something else, broadcasters and streamers, and the audiovisual cinema sector is something else, producers is something else, and the cinema sector is again something else. And if we don't make it different, I mean, even legally speaking, and if there is a total confusion in the regulation, I mean, the specificities of our landscape will just vanish.
Thank you. Juliette. Guillaume, you were talking before this panel about sort of a VOD focus mania in Brussels, the European policy. What do you mean by that, and how to change this? No, what would be your policy recommendations?
I mean, in terms of like general policy recommendation, it's kind of things that have been already discussed, how to, you know, continue to nurture cultural diversity, but not only in terms of content, but also in terms of stakeholders. So stakeholders throughout the value chain, but also stakeholders of all sides, because at the moment, yes, Netflix is doing well, but they are providing some unfair competition, to say the least, with some local streamers that have no way to compete with them, which is very obvious. Something that is very important for us at UNIC is to preserve also the concept of territoriality of copyright and everything relating to the time exclusivity, so windows, but also geographical exclusivity of how rights are negotiated for a given title.
Can you explain?
You know how films are now basically especially for smaller European films. This is something that Juliette and Christine will be way better at me to explain this, but rights are being sold territory by territory, and those films are generally have a staggered release strategy. So that first release, for instance, a Swedish film will first be released in Sweden, then it will get successful thanks to being shown in multiple festivals globally. Then someone will notice it from Germany at that festival that took place in Italy, will buy the rights and will later show it in his country because he will own the rights for that territory, and so on and so on and so on. And this is how, for a lot of films, money is actually being made, not in a very short time frame, like you have often for Netflix films, but it can be over 2 years, or 3 years, or even more. And that's only focusing, for instance, on the theatrical window, and then you have to focus on all the other windows that come into play. Another very important thing for us at UNIC, and something that Tim kind of mentioned, is to preserve Creative Europe media support for local players. This is something that is fundamental for smaller cinema operators in particular, but for local distributors and many local players in many territories. And again, something that Juliette mentioned, everything related to the AVMS and Article 13.2 in particular, and the need to ensure that streamers, even when they don't have their HQ in a given territory, that they do contribute to local film funds, and that this contribution is a fair contribution to kind of really what Juliette mentioned earlier. And so I gave a long answer, not answering your initial question on the focus on VOD. You know, this is lobbying. This is politicians. They focus on something. You know, it's very hard to deal with that. It's something that we lobby for all the time, to make politicians understand that there are other parts to the value chain. I think we do quite a good job at the end of the day.
What is your main argument?
The main argument is really that you need to nurture a business model and an industry that already has a lot of elements to thrive, that there are already innovations out there that you need to kind of help spread and make a more efficient use of. We all spoke about, for instance, the lack of audience data and audience research in Europe. This is really a big deal. A big part of my job is to find that audience data, so it's really a big struggle. For instance, we always speak when we discuss with cinema operators and distributors about the need to use data analytics more efficiently and so on. So these are all very important points. And then when you talk to policymakers, they talk to you about AI and how it could help out how cinemas reach their audience. I'm sorry, but this is completely out there. Why not? Maybe. But sometimes you need to focus on what is already there and how to improve the situation with the tools we already have available or could make available by investing in the right elements.
It will sound a little bit as an echo, I warn you. So, well, as our colleagues, we also think that at EMS, there is work to be done on the implementation, also because it's 50% of European content, that's a lot of stuff. So we would like to see figures with a more granularity on, between film series, etc. Because, and also national, non-national, because European can also be national. And for us, it's about, again, the diversity, that if I'm here in Belgium and I'm going on a Belgian platform, I want to make sure that what is on offer is not only Flemish series. I'm not saying it's the case, but that you will also find that, I don't know, collective Romanian documentary and etc., etc., etc. And we are also very aware that it's impossible to have everything, but it's also important. We are buyers because we are in the middle, so we buy the rights from the producer and the sales agent, but then we are sellers to the exhibitors, to the platform, etc. You won't be surprised to know that if there is no buyer, you can't sell. So if you knock at the door on Netflix and are not taking your films, you can't explode them. So this is also something that is very important to make clear. And on that, this monitoring of the FMS and more specifically the quotas where we are really now. And so then we can then defend and make sure that diversity is not just a pretty word. Then transparency for us is essential. You don't know anything of what is happening online. There is actually one country who is asking to all its players, that's Switzerland. You can go to the Bureau des Statistiques, so that's bfs.admin.ch. I can send you the link after. They've done so now every player in Switzerland is forced, it's mandatory to share figures. So it's also valid for the Netflix and the others. So from their figures, you can also already extrapolate what is working, what is not working, the difference between the origin of and the genre of titles that are put on platforms, then what is seen by the consumers, etc., etc. We don't have that in Europe at all, and that would be already a start. Then, of course, between us, try to have more granularity on the consumer, try to understand your consumer, because that's also how you can go and catch the consumer. So Creative Europe Media on that is paramount, because in such risky area of business, especially when we are speaking of the most independent / actors, players of all or the profession we represent, it's risky. It means that also you need to have a little bit of support. And to the contrary of producers and exhibitors and distributors, you have really to look for the support. There is not much. We have Creative Europe Media for European non-national film, only that. So that's not enough, definitely. Also echoed everything everywhere all at once of the Brussels bubble. You have to realize that in Brussels, all these people are from another country mostly. So they tend to push their own frustration, into policy. And it's like, yeah, well, you're not very representative of everybody in the end.
They will give you the example that they can't access Estonian football games from Brussels. It's because there's no audience for that, except for you, Estonian MEP.
And the thing is that on territoriality, I will just give a small example since we are in Ghent. It's my favorite example, so it's good that this starts in Ghent. To go back to my distributors, that is in the Benelux. So we have territoriality because this is somehow limiting your scope when you're releasing a film, because you are working a lot on exclusivity. We give the film in exclusivity to the cinema, then an exclusivity as well, etc., which gives value. And so we have the rights you buy. It's like you have a virtual border around you. So when, as a Belgian distributors, you have the rights for Belgium, it is Belgium. C'est tout. Not, Belgium and Luxembourg. And then we can also have the Netherlands. But I mean, there is a wall around Belgium. This is to protect you from unfair competition as well. Let's say that we are in Belgium, you have a film that is released at the end of the year. So like now, most probably, if it's an independent film that has a nice scope, it will be presented at the film festival in Ghent. That is early in October, because it's a very big platform, a promotional platform for a film, because just you hear about it in the press, on the news, etc., etc. So you will use it. So you will put your film there, and it will add on the promotion you do yourself, of course, as a distributor, because you're also doing that a lot. It's the most part of the job. And then the film, after a few months, in Belgium, generally it's around 4 months, will be on VOD. So that means that, for example, a film that was in Ghent and released right after in Ghent in October will be on the platform at the end of January, beginning of February, depending on the negotiation. Then we go to our colleagues in the Netherlands. Our colleague in the Netherlands, they will probably do the same kind of job, but with Rotterdam, which is the big film festival also for consumers, not only for industry. That is at the end of January. But if you are at the end of January with a film that is, so that is working very well because we have geo-blocking. So where you are in Rotterdam, there is nothing happening with the film, but what you have decided, because Belgium is in the bubble and the other countries is the same. If actually you cut the border, and that's what the end of geo-blocking means, the end of territoriality, is that these virtual borders that we have implemented as a system, as an industry 125 years ago, and it's still working because, 125 years, we can say we have a certain experience there. If you cut that, it doesn't work because that means that my film that is on the VOD platform at the end of January, beginning of February in Belgium is also on the platform available in the Netherlands and in Spain and in Italy and in France and in Portugal, etc., etc., etc. What will happen is that Rotterdam will say like, yeah, I would have spent a lot of money to have the talents coming, red carpet, etc. But the film is on Mubi, on Netflix, or whatever. So why would I do that when people can watch the film from there so fast? So I'm not putting money in it. The cinemas will say, yeah, thank you. I will pay my team, I will pay for my projectionist to put the film. So maybe I take it, but I will just give you one screening a day at, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the morning. No, maybe that's too much. I think 10 o'clock in the evening. If they take the film. So it means that it will have a direct impact on your ability to exploit the title in another territory. So it's impossible. You can't make it. It cuts the ability you have to really exploit a title in a certain territory just before there was another territory before. I used Benelux, but then you can extrapolate that to many other countries. First one will release the film with English subtitles in Europe, blah. And it's online. So you just have to spread the word on a Facebook page and zoom. Everybody knows that, Romania, I had to wait until March to see close, but it was in Ghent and it's subtitled in English. Zoom, Belgian platform, I can watch it. So it's just something that is practically not doable because if we as distributor, because it's more us, can't exploit the films, we can't pay back royalties to the producers who won't make the second close. So it means that also Lucas Don has to work, for Carrefour maybe in the future. So it has really, joke aside, a really huge impact on everything. This we have explained with many other examples from many different points of view to the policy makers. Well, we are still holding the fort, but it's a non-stop discussion. It's so boring. Sometimes I want to record myself and press play with my example of Ghent and blah, 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 because they have heard it and they still say, no, but 2022, everything, all at once, everywhere, and boom. And so there is a no-go linked to the fact that they are in the Brussels bubble and think that they would like to see their Estonian series or whatever film they can't find it. And if you look for it, you will, of course, find something you can find. I mean, it's obvious at the same time, if you do a little research online, what is available nowadays, it's crazy. I mean, there is so much. I know because I do this kind of research for ourselves, and I'm just like, okay, I mean, there is a lot of choice.
The EU published, I think, this year a study on the topic, and on average in the EU, for one citizen, they have access to 8,000 audiovisual works at any time. 8,000. It's enormous.
Question also for the example of Switzerland, but is not a EU member, EU and
yeah, but that's in Europe.
Yeah, it's
One topic we did not mention, and that relates to this, is policy as well. And it's very important to know, and I did have a slide for this, but I don't know to show them. It's something that can be demonstrated very easily. There's proof of it. As soon as the film is made available online, it will be massively pirated on a global scales.
We have a few slides here.
If you want me to, it's really, I don't want to take so much time.
Okay, sorry, it's another.
To give you just an idea of like global piracy trends, piracy was going down at the beginning of the decade, but now it's going up again. It's rising again, and this is perhaps connected also to streaming habits and so on. It's very hard to say. But what we know for sure, and what I just said, is that as soon as a film is available online, it will be pirated, whatever you do. And this brings us also to the topic of territoriality, because you can give a very practical example of how that can be really impactful. A film like Back Now, which was a very successful film in France last year in 2021. It did like 2 million admissions. And you know in France how they are very strict with that theatrical window. In theory, the film has to stay in cinema for at least 4 months, and actually will only go to Netflix now after 14 months. And it was even more, it was 36 months, I think, before that. So it's like very, very, very strict. But 3 weeks after the film was released in cinema in France, it was made available on Netflix in Belgium. And if you look at the piracy data, there's a massive spike in piracy, and it's actually the piracy peak, the day where you have most piracy, when it was made available on Netflix in Belgium. And where does that piracy come from? Because again, it's data that is accessible. France. So it's French audience that could have gone to the cinema will turn to the pirated version of the film. And this is really, really a big problem. And in a way, it has helped us because studios also have access to that piracy data. And they saw during the pandemic that all their VOD, day and date experiments were commercial failures and were massively pirated. The 3 most pirated films of 2021 were day and date releases. So I mean, it's a huge problem.
Okay, before going to the Q&A part, what is your wish list?
I think it's similar to what has been said before. I think the overall the emphasis in both national support and European support has always been on volume production, ensure that there are enough titles. And Creative Europe and other mechanisms have helped distribution promotion. But there is still, if you look at the efforts that are being done in the US to get a title off the ground, marketing-wise, and the distribution capacity, that is still very much superior to what we have. And I think we somehow need to reorient part of our support mechanisms much more to an emphasis on non-national circulation. If you look at the market shares, the European market shares in each country, most of it is made up by domestic market share, popular titles in their own market, but not a Polish film, not an Italian film. And if I currently see the success of a Flemish nature documentary that draws more than 200,000 people to the cinema, and then one film that draws more than 500,000, and then Close, and hopefully The Eight Mountains as of today, what they have in common is an enormous promotion machine behind it. The public broadcaster owns the rights to the nature documentary. So they invested everything that they could in promotion for that title. And you see that it works. You couldn't escape it. Same with Zillion. It was every day there was a newspaper article about Zillion. And I think it shows that there is a lot more potential still for titles that do not find their way to audiences. So we need to reorient it a bit towards that. The second thing is that I think that we need to make sure that as European policymakers, national policymakers, and screen agencies, that we're not transforming the production industry into a service industry. And like what was said, because of the rat race with all these tax incentives and the fact that streamers are directly investing and taking a lot of the rights, we need to make sure that we protect a very strong definition of European work and a very strong definition of what an independent producer is. Again, also in Flanders, there are now discussions popping up and difficulties for Flanders Audiovisual Fund on who could be eligible for money. Because a lot of our producers are now, Caviar, for example, is 70% owned by Telenet. How do you deal with that as a film fund? But Caviar also makes good movies. So it's very difficult to deal with that. Then the third issue relates to data. I think if national policymakers can do it, we need to make sure that the next version of AVMS or next addition or clarification to the investment obligations contains clear definition on rights repayment and clear definitions on data transparency from the players. I don't think that Netflix needs to put a weekly bulletin for everyone in Europe with what scored well and what not. At least producers and distributors and screen agencies need to know how well titles did. I need to have some sort of insight in what works and what not. Otherwise, how can you base your strategy on it? So that's also one. And then one that hasn't been discussed before, I think, is also coinciding with what I said about the emphasis on distribution and promotion. I think that there was a lot of money that has been spent, luckily, thanks to COVID, as part of Relance in Europe. There was in Belgium alone, there was an unseen availability of money to save stalled productions, to initiate all kinds of media innovation projects that we also benefited from, I have to be honest. But what was overlooked and what I think was a missed opportunity is the support that is needed for renovation and structural investment in art house cinemas, in just exhibition in theaters and alternative theaters. Because if you look at, for example, here in Ghent, the problem is not that there are no audiences going to the Sphinx, that there is a good film, the room is full. The problem is that a lot of these art house theaters, either they have to pay an enormous rent because they don't own the building and it's owned by big contractors or real estate consortia. And the second thing is that a lot of these theaters, they need a one-time enormous investment in the capacity in the room and renovation. And in that sense, I sometimes miss a bit of courage from municipalities, provinces, governments to do this enormous investment. For example, here in Ghent, there was also the idea of Studio Scope being purchased by Filmfest Ghent, supported by the city. Yeah, this types of investments is enormously costly. And then I can imagine that from a politician's point of view, you rather invest in an edition of film with your COVID money that is out 2 years later, that you can say, okay, we as the government invested in this, than in an investment that will only generate a return on investment in 10, 15 years time. So that's a bit a missed opportunity for me.
Like what happens in the Netherlands, and local municipalities investing structurally.
Yeah.
Maybe one last.
Just to echo this, because I didn't mention it, but it is very important for us too. And we have seen that also, okay, it depends from a country to another, but Belgium was not a very good example, definitely not plans. Sorry, because, you know, cinemas that goes a lot with distribution and that support is indeed very much concentrated in production. And what happened is that we are during COVID, even countries where they would support, which was at least already something in cinemas, because in other countries it was zero in cinemas either. But then saying, oh, it would help distribution, but that's not true. I think it's very important that when it comes to funding, that there is a real holistic way of looking at how you support the whole value chain to get an impact that is benefit for everybody, including the audiences and diversity, etc. So I think it's local, it's regional, and it's European also, and it is not done. And generally, it's more like a ping pong game, like a member state are saying, oh, but this is Creative Europe Media, this is to do this, and then they are saying, oh, that's certain, blah, 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 blah. And so I guess that's a little bit of a therapy group could be useful for funds. So that's enough.
The problem is also that every time new challenges pop up, every fund tries to tackle these challenges. So you now have Eurimage also doing television scripted series. And you have Creative Europe that has a list of activities that is so enormous. Video game industries, web series, short format, every time something is new, they also try to jump on the bandwagon, but that creates an enormous fragmentation. Whereas I think now Creative Europe should focus on its core mission, which is supporting screen talent networking, distribution and promotion, and not all these additional activities that also require so much money.
Okay, maybe because we have only 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, let's say, for our Q&A. Is there any question? And I know that on my right-hand side there were a few questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for this overview, and allow me, which was really, really detailed and interesting, but allow me to, I simplify a little bit. And I simplify in this sense that television and especially film economics is not my field. But when I look at decades of media concentration development and of course media concentration research, I would say what you're telling is just sort of the new round in media concentration, which came up by the streamers, with new forms, of course, many new forms, new problems, and so on. But in a nutshell, it is media concentration, as it was the process which we had in any media going on. And as well, when I look, I'm mostly interested in this policy question that you asked in the final round. When I look at the media concentration efforts of the EU, I'm quite negative. I remember still already in the middle of the 90s that one of our famous in Germany media legal researchers said there is nothing such as regulating of media concentration, although the first green books on media concentration appeared in the 80s, early 90s, something like this. And therefore, I'm wondering if we, in some way, should think more out of the box. I don't know in which direction, but when look at this wish list that we heard now, it is very, very small tabled, very operational at this and this and this point. And I'm missing a little bit in this ongoing, and this is more a question to us as researchers than to you as practitioners, obviously. But I'm missing a little bit more what sort of ideas on combating media concentration did we develop and what should we go further on? So this is more an open question for the round of all of us. But in some way, I would say there are new elements in what all we discussed here now, or what you described. But in a nutshell, it is the huge problem of media concentration and policy not really willing to address it, or being too instrumental and not daring enough to challenge what has to be challenged, because it is maintaining cultural and diversity and content diversity. It is a political issue. And we all know that media are a double-sided coin, being a business and being a meritory good. And what sort of discussion do we need more to strengthen this sort of meritory good side, and to, as I say, think out of the box what we can demand from, as you said, the regional, all the levels, which as well should work together.
Any reaction on this
I have a little comment.
concentration issue?
Is that, we depend on DG Connect. We are not in culture anymore for years now, and I think this is also playing a role. Especially that they lack it. I think they lack it. That's my very personal way of thinking. I think they prefer, the examples of the Netflix, etc., that a small distributor in Belgium, they don't care. But a word we have heard a lot the last years was we need champions. And it's just like, I'm sorry, but that documentary from Romania, for me, is a champion. It's talking about very important stuff. But they see it in a very different way, and it's not cultural at all. Yeah, when they can use it to complain on something that they can't see, like, the Italian stuff, whatever. So I think it's also the perception of the people you are talking to. So this is very European, what I'm talking about, but definitely Creative Europe media being under a DG where actually culture is not so important, but it's the connect. So it's networks and this kind of stuff is playing a role.
Yeah, it's a very interesting remark on making the link with media concentration, but what I feel is that additional media concentration rules or media ownership rules won't help us in this one, because it is precisely the fact that we lack very strong infrastructures, production and distribution infrastructures, that is not compete with the US players, and it is the lack of media ownership rules that is giving chances to multiplexes like Kinepolis to grow and to actually stand a chance against the Disneys and have some bargaining power. The thing is that production distribution VOD is so fragmented across different European markets, but there is a big difference between media ownership, media concentration, when you look at it from the perspective of film and audiovisual, and then, for example, for newspaper and other titles, in the sense that this is not about, this is about territories. Here we need to stick to small territories. It is a Latvian film will never be, no matter how much ownership competition policy you have, it will never be liked as much as a French title in France. And that's a reality that you cannot circumvent. So I think, is there a problem with competition? Definitely. Is there a problem with competition law? In this case, I wouldn't say there is a problem with competition law when it comes to plurality, but for all other discussions regarding to news, I think, but not for film. I think for me, the shifts that were proposed are not cosmetic because they do require a fundamental shift. The fact, the answers that have come from policy that's true. That's very much based on path dependency. For example, I do want to see, for example, what it would mean to give up territoriality for different states in Europe. Calculate it, make the scenarios, and say what it would mean if we go towards one European window, one European territory. But then at least we have a proper discussion, and then we can say for once and for all, this won't be the solution. But it is true that policy answers that are coming now are they're always about treating the symptoms rather than the cause. That's true. And what is needed is a fundamental overhaul where you say, okay, for example, we're going to, as Creative Europe, fundamentally reshuffle everything we do and focus everything on, let's say, distribution and promotion, so to speak. But that will not happen. That will not happen.
Thank you, Tim. Any other question?
Very small one. I've noticed that in some film festivals, the criteria was changed during COVID because of the theatrical run. Do you think this will change back? And if not, how do you think this will change the platformization? So like movies having to be like in one cinema for 7 days in order to go into the film festivals?
I'm not aware of that change, to be honest. You mean the conditions?
Like
for
at Venice and other festivals, they changed the rules to allow for Netflix to actually show their films. And before it was not possible because if you looked at the criteria to take part, you had to have a proper theatrical window. I don't have an opinion.
You have an opinion?
I mean, first of all, that's the decision of festival to take. That's their decision. We don't want to influence that in any way. The reason they've been doing this is because they want to attract audience. They want to attract people like each and every one of us, and they know that perhaps to do that they need to do a lot of buzz in the press, and the best way to do buzz is to throw a rock in the water and see what happens. So they've been doing that collaborating with Netflix and other players. The reason why the streamers are doing that is quite interesting because they want what cinema has. They want the notoriety of having their films winning major festivals, winning major awards, and having this image of being great cinematographic works. And still, at the end of the day, their focus is on a very small screen, which is definitely not suitable for those type of films. Netflix is releasing the next EUMEPLAT 2 film, which is 3 hours and 10 minutes, is highly experimental, that they are showing in some art house cinemas everywhere in the world. But it's kind of weird, the reason why they're promoting that type of film. It's interesting. It's an interesting debate in itself.
But I think that will change as well. I think Netflix is now investing a lot in theatrical and Amazon as well. I think it's part of this promotion marketing move.
I do agree.
But because if you see what's underneath in their platform strategy and investment strategy, I think they will have to abandon film to some extent just because of cutbacks. And very recently, one of the heads of Netflix said we won't do vanity projects again like Irishman and Roma, and which was already strange to hear that they called it vanity projects. But I think they will focus in at least Netflix and HBO in the next years on prioritizing blockbuster for direct to consumer titles. So lots of typical blockbuster content, and I think that might be a good thing for European cinema.
Okay. Thank you very much. We haven't discussed everything, of course, but we touched upon many things. That's a good thing.